My name is Evelyn Thomas. I'm 33 years old. And last Monday, my husband Robert died while saving another patient. I collapsed right there in the ICU hallway. When I called my parents, sobbing uncontrollably, my mother said, "Why are you calling at this hour? It's Elena's birthday. Call back tomorrow, okay?" That night, my 5-year-old son Noah and I sat alone, holding each other as our world fell apart. You never think it'll happen to you, that your own family will abandon you and your child in your darkest hour. But what they did next was even worse. If you've ever felt betrayed by your family when you needed them the most, please let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe to join others who have heard and felt this kind of pain. I met Robert on an October afternoon in a cold emergency room, surrounded by the sharp smell of antiseptic and the hurried footsteps of doctors. A taxi had slammed into the back of my car right at a curve on Lakeshore Drive. My forehead hit the steering wheel. Blood streamed down my cheek, soaking the collar of my shirt. But I didn't cry. I didn't groan. I just sat there, gripping the handle of my purse, and waited. He was the one who stitched my wound, a second-year resident. When he put on his gloves and asked if I was in pain, I smiled and said, "Just a bit sore. I'm okay." He paused, looked at me longer than usual. Deep blue eyes, calm and steady, as if he could see through everything I was trying to hide. After that, he found ways to see me again, under the pretense of checking on my stitches, sending a small card, then inviting me out for coffee at the book cafe near the hospital. 3 weeks later, we were inseparable. Exactly 1 year after that night, Robert proposed to me in the small apartment we shared in Evanston. He knelt with a cheap ring box, but looked at me like the entire world was inside it. I said yes without hesitation. I was 22 then, and he was the reason I believed in love. Robert's resident salary was so low that sometimes I had to take an advance from work just to pay our electric bill. But he always brought home the kind of things no money could ever buy. Heart-shaped pancake breakfasts, handwritten notes on the mirror that said, "You're stronger than your fear," or the nights he held me close when I collapsed after a failed job interview. We had nothing, except each other. The first 7 years of our marriage were a struggle, but they were filled with hope. When Robert completed his neurosurgery program and was accepted into a major hospital in Kentucky, it felt like we were entering a new chapter. More stable, less anxious. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, with a backyard for mint plants and a hammock between two oak trees. And then, just when it felt like we'd found our rhythm, we started trying for a baby. But those were 2 years filled with heartbreak. 5 failed IVF rounds and 3 miscarriages. There were nights I lay on the bathroom floor, in so much pain I couldn't even scream, just pressed my face against the cold tile. Robert would sit beside me, holding my hand in silence, the same way he did in that ER years ago. We filled out adoption applications, compiled a list of states with faster approval systems. But then, a miracle happened. I got pregnant with Noah. 9 months later, during a high-risk delivery, Robert didn't leave my bedside for a single second. He read medical textbooks to me, his voice steady and calm, as if he could shield me and our baby from every danger with just the sound of it. When he held Noah for the first time, the hands that had always been so sure in the operating room were trembling. I had never seen him that happy. In the 5 beautiful years that followed, we were a family filled with laughter. I had always dreamed of seeing Robert coach Noah's basketball team, even though I knew nothing about basketball myself, but Robert learned with him. After dinner, he'd pull up YouTube videos, watching drills while Noah sprawled on the couch watching cartoons. In the beginning, he was clumsy. He missed his shots, knocked the ball against the rim of the makeshift hoop attached to the drying rack, but he stayed patient, and more importantly, he was there. He never missed a school event or a weekend field trip. His surgery schedule was always packed, but between operations were brightly marked slots on the calendar. Family time, date night with Noah, or simply cooking with Evelyn. There were signs about his health that both of us overlooked. Every time he was tired or short of breath, I urged him to see a specialist. But he'd just smile faintly, pat my head. Did you forget I'm a doctor? I read my own symptoms every day. It's just acid reflux. I didn't know that I was believing a reassurance meant for patients. Used to soothe his own wife. He blamed the chest tightness on work pressure, lack of sleep, or not drinking enough water. He even bought a case of alkaline water, telling Noah, "Starting today, we're going to be healthier. At least 3 bottles a day, okay?" I believed him. And worst of all, I wanted to believe him. That morning, that fateful morning, nothing felt unusual. While I was still under the covers, Robert had already been outside, finishing the last steps to install the basketball hoop he and Noah had waited all winter for. He was in an old sweatshirt covered in dirt, but grinning like a kid. He walked into the house, washing his hands as he told Noah, "This afternoon, I'm going to show you Dad's magic finger, okay?" Noah burst out laughing, and I called out from the kitchen, tilting my head, "Then I'll be the referee. Deal?" Robert turned back, kissed me, and said, "Just make sure the referee buys a new ball for our legendary game this afternoon." Such an ordinary sentence. Gentle, casual, so trivial that no one would think it would be the final period. At 10:20 that morning, I was standing in line at the grocery store when my phone buzzed. A message from Robert. "Emergency surgery, bad car crash. I might be here until late. Please tell Noah I'm sorry. Tomorrow I'll let him win by 1 point." I read the message and smiled gently. That was Robert. Always devoted to his patients but never forgetting to be a dad. I even texted back, "We'll deliver the message, but your son won't let it go that easy." I didn't know. That would be the last time my phone would ever light up with his name. At 10:49 p.m., I was folding Noah's clothes when the phone rang, an unfamiliar number from the hospital. A young resident's voice, shaky, couldn't mask his unease. "Mrs. Thomas." "Robert." Robert went into cardiac arrest during surgery. We tried resuscitating him, but it's very serious. He's in the ICU. I don't remember how I got dressed. All I remember is running every red light, ignoring every speed limit. When I arrived, the doctor just shook his head. I rushed into the ICU. I dropped to my knees, called out his name, and gripped his hand, still warm. I rocked his arm, sobbed as I clung to him, but he didn't respond. He didn't move. The room was silent, save for the monitor that no longer beeped and the dull hum of the fluorescent light overhead. I didn't know what to do next, but like anyone in deep pain, I thought of my mother. My hands trembled so badly I misdialed twice before the phone finally rang. Once. Twice. On the third ring, she picked up. "Hello? Why are you calling so late?" Her voice didn't sound like someone who had just been woken up. It was alert, like someone who had just finished a cup of coffee. I didn't know where to begin. I wanted to scream, to break down, to collapse. But all I could say was, "Mom, Robert's gone." A restrained voice, barely holding back the fall. I thought she would sympathize, console me. But instead she asked, "Robert who?" I closed my eyes and clenched the phone. My husband. He had a heart attack while operating on another patient. They couldn't save him. Mom. He's dead. On the other end, she sighed. A light sigh, void of any grief. "Oh my. But why are you calling now? I'm hosting Elena's birthday party. We have guests. Can we talk tomorrow?" I thought I misheard. The man I loved most in the world had died less than 20 minutes ago. And my mother, my own mother, had just told me to call back tomorrow. "Mom, I just lost my husband." "I know, but Elena only turns 30 once, Evelyn. I can't just leave the party in the middle, and me coming to the hospital won't change anything now. Let's talk more tomorrow, okay? I couldn't say anything else. I let the phone fall to the hospital floor. In the background, the birthday music kept playing, the clinking of glasses, laughter. Elena's voice bragging to someone about the new gift. From my new boyfriend, 3 times more expensive than the old one. Robert had just died. And on the other end, the world kept dancing like nothing had been lost. I picked up the phone and whispered, then, "Happy birthday, Elena." And I hung up. I didn't want to hear one more word from my mother. I looked at Robert one last time before thinking about the only person I had left, Noah, our son, still sleeping alone in an empty house. I left the hospital close to 1 a.m. The drive home was strangely quiet. Red lights, yellow lights, green. I don't remember what I passed. All I recall is opening the front door and suddenly, the house felt enormous and hollow. Our wedding photo in the hallway looked strange, like staring at 2 strangers who once loved each other in a world that no longer exists. Noah was still asleep, blanket over his chest, hugging the gray teddy bear Robert gave him when he turned 2. The soft glow of the nightlight cast a warmth over his cheeks, like he still lived in an untouched world. I stood there for a long time. A part of me wanted to wait until morning, to give him one last night believing everything was still okay. But then I remembered Robert's final message. Tomorrow I'll let him win by 1 point. And I couldn't let Noah wake up expecting that. I sat down gently beside his bed, laid my hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Noah, wake up for a bit, sweetheart." He rubbed his eyes, sitting up groggily, his hair messy, his face still drowsy. "Mom, why aren't you asleep yet? Where's Dad?" I took a deep breath to prepare the words, but they all dissolved in my throat. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something important. About Dad." Noah sat up straight, his small hand clutching the teddy bear. He looked at me, waiting, as if sensing something was wrong. I placed my hand on his knee, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad had an emergency at the hospital. He had a heart attack while trying to save someone else. The doctors did everything they could, but they couldn't save him." I thought my son would burst into tears, but he didn't. Only silence, heavy, suffocating. Noah looked at me, his lips trembling, and softly asked, "Dad, is dead, Mom?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, eyes blurred, my hand firm on his shoulder as hot tears slid down my cheeks. He looked down at the teddy bear, then back up with a shaky voice. "So, Dad's not coming home tomorrow?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart, he can't come back anymore, but he's always right here." I placed my hand over his chest where his heart raced. Noah gasped, then suddenly burst into sobs. "But he promised. He said I'd win. He said he'd come back." I pulled him into my arms. His cries tore through the quiet room. "I hate hospitals. Why didn't they save him? He's the best. He's a doctor." I held him tighter. My tears soaked his hair, but I didn't scream. I only whispered, "Dad loves you. He'll always love you." He didn't want to leave Noah, but some things are out of his hands now. Noah sobbed and gasped in my arms, and after a while he whispered, "I still want him to keep his promise." I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that by the time Noah fell asleep from exhaustion, I was still holding him, arms clinging, heart unresting. That first night after losing Robert, I didn't cry for myself. I cried because my son had just lost the greatest hero of his life, and there was nothing I could do to bring him back. The next morning, while Noah was still sound asleep, I began making phone calls. Not to invite anyone, but to ask for help. I didn't know where to begin. Everything felt like a funeral equation with no formula. Choose a church, choose music, choose a casket. choose flowers. I hadn't even learned how to say the word death without choking on it, and now I had to organize an event for the world to share this grief with me. I called my parents first. No one picked up. Second call, then a third. Finally, my mother replied by text. I'm busy cleaning the mess the guests left yesterday. It looks like a war zone. I'll call you later this afternoon. I put the phone down. I didn't call again. Instead, I dialed Miriam, Robert's mother. Just 2 hours later, she and Alan were at my house. At first, I didn't recognize them. Miriam's hair was a mess, and Alan's shirt was wrinkled. So unlike their usually polished appearance when visiting us before. Miriam opened her arms and held me tightly. She didn't ask what I had prepared. She simply asked, "How do you want this to go?" That was it. And then we held each other and cried. For the next 3 days, my home was no longer quiet, but in a strangely warm way. Robert's parents came every morning with a clear plan: meet the funeral home, contact the pastor, arrange the service music Robert had loved, Claire de Lune, the piece he always played on Sunday nights while tidying up the house. Miriam brought Robert's favorite apple pie, baked right in my kitchen. She said it was her way of keeping his breath lingering here a little longer. Alan accompanied me to the funeral home to sign the papers. He didn't speak much, but every time my hand trembled, he gently placed his hand over my wrist as if to say, "I'm here." Noah was comforted by Roman, Robert's younger brother, who flew halfway across the world from Tokyo, almost 18 hours, just to hold his nephew and say to me, "You don't have to be strong alone anymore. Only my parents." Were still nowhere to be found. Not until the afternoon of the third day did my mother send a single message. "I heard the funeral's on Saturday. What color flowers are you choosing? Elena says don't pick white. Too depressing." I didn't respond. Meanwhile, Robert's colleagues began visiting. They didn't come with flowery words. They just arrived, nodded, quietly placed a hand on my shoulder, bowed slightly to Noah, and left behind something small but deeply meaningful. A handwritten letter recalling the time Robert stayed at the hospital for 14 hours to save a 5-year-old girl. A photo of Robert eating instant noodles in the on-call room at 2 a.m. with the caption, "Last one to leave the hospital." A nurse named Carla came with a bag of food. She said, "We've been sharing the cooking. Robert once said his wife hated cooking when she was sad." I laughed, and then cried immediately after. On the day of the funeral, there was a light rain. Noah held my hand tightly. He wore the little suit Robert had once bought him for his kindergarten graduation, now tailored to fit his growing frame. The small church was filled, from residents and former patients of Robert's, to his old classmates and the neighbors from our first apartment. Everyone stood silently. No one smiled. No phones out for pictures. They had come to bid farewell to a man they respected. 30 minutes into the ceremony, my parents arrived. My mother wore a wine-red dress, heavy makeup, and a thin fur coat, though the weather wasn't cold. As she entered, she scanned the room, as if checking for people's opinions on her appearance, not mourning her son-in-law. Elena came with her new boyfriend. She took selfies at the church fence, added a pink filter and a caption, "Forever grateful." Grateful. For what? I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I just felt like I had witnessed something entirely foreign, not family, not kinship. When I stood up to read the eulogy, the room fell completely silent. I spoke about the first time Robert held Noah in the delivery room, his hands shaking like a child's. I spoke of his morning routine, brewing coffee, missing the cup 5 times before laughing and saying, "Maybe I'm only good with scalpels, kiddo." I spoke about the basketball game that never happened, the promise that never got fulfilled, and about the man who walked through my life with a love so deep, so vast, no one could ever fill its absence. Noah held my hand and looked up, asking, "Is Dad listening, Mom?" I nodded, lips trembling. "Yes, sweetheart. Dad's always listening. He never left this place. I placed my hand over his heart. The room wept. My mother left halfway through. She looked at no one. She didn't turn back. At the memorial reception in my backyard after the service, I overheard my father talking to Uncle James, a cousin on my mother's side, near the drinks table. He was pouring a glass, swirling it like he was discussing the stock market. Robert had a solid career in medicine, especially neurosurgery. Partner-level salaries must have been generous. Not to mention, a physician's life insurance policy like his would be substantial. Evelyn will be fine. I stood behind the windbreaker wall, clutching the waistband of my dress. My husband had just been buried less than 3 hours earlier, and my father was discussing the net worth of that loss, as if Robert were some just liquidated asset. I had to use every last ounce of strength not to walk out and confront him right then, not to ask why money was the first thing on his mind during a funeral. But I was too exhausted, too empty, and too focused on whether Noah was okay to start a fight. My mother and Elena did virtually nothing to help with the reception. They sat in the living room, receiving condolences as if they were the center of grief, while I drifted from table to table like a shadow, nodding, shaking hands, and mechanically repeating, "Thank you for coming. Robert would have loved this stew." I spoke like a machine, because I feared if I stopped, I'd collapse. It was Robert's colleagues, his friends, the spouses of patients he once saved, who truly stood behind me then. While my mother whispered about booking a hotel room to get some rest, Robert's mother, Miriam, quietly took care of Noah. She made sure he ate, wasn't jostled by guests, and had a quiet corner to draw in when he felt overwhelmed. My son didn't need soothing words. He just needed someone to understand that a 5-year-old who lost his father didn't need to be polite. His father, Alan, helped clear tables, washed dishes, and checked the bathrooms when the house got crowded. He never asked what I needed. He just did it. Even as the last guest left, he was still stacking plastic chairs under the awning. The contrast between Robert's family and mine was heartbreakingly clear. One side, quietly grieving but stretching their arms to shield me and Noah like we were blood. The other, people tied to me by blood, sitting just a few feet away, yet so distant I couldn't even hear their hearts beating anymore. Robert's will was mentioned briefly in a passing conversation with the funeral director. I didn't react. I didn't want to think about lawyers, assets, or legal final words. To me, Robert was the man who taught Noah to shoot hoops, who got the coffee ratio wrong but always hugged me on time every morning. Not a name on a power of attorney. Christian, an old friend of Robert's, and the one handling our family's estate plan, came up to me toward the end. He spoke gently. "Evelyn, give it a week, maybe 2. There's no rush. Robert made sure you and Noah are protected. Everything is in order. No one can touch that." I nodded and thanked him. I didn't ask anything else because I trusted Robert. Even in death, I trusted the way he prepared for everything. When the house finally emptied of people, when the chairs were folded, when only one soft yellow light remained in the backyard, my parents and Elena stood up. "We should leave before it gets too dark," my mother said, pulling on her coat like someone who had just fulfilled a social obligation. "You're okay now, right?" Elena asked, without waiting for an answer. They did hug me, but it was perfunctory. They didn't offer to help clean up. They didn't ask if Noah needed someone to sleep with him. They said nothing about the fact that this was the first night my son and I would sleep in a house without Robert. They left, and didn't look back. But Roman and Robert's parents stayed. Miriam tidied up the living room and laid out bedding for Noah's grandparents. Roman lay on the sofa and said, "You don't have to say anything. We're here." Before heading upstairs, Miriam hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear with a trembling voice, "You're not alone, Evelyn. We all lost Robert, but we still have each other. That night, lying in bed with Noah curled up beside me, I listened to his soft breaths. Outside, the wind whispered. The moon was high. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't completely alone. But I no longer harbored the illusion that the people who gave birth to me would be the ones who stayed. The ones who should have stood at the front lines of the greatest crisis in my life had proven they only knew how to stand outside, count the money, and leave when the party was over. 2 weeks after the funeral, the weather in Kentucky turned cold. Every morning, when I watered the mint plants by the window, the smell of damp soil and the fog in the air made me feel like I was breathing in all the things that hadn't yet healed. Robert used to say, "You know, mornings have their own scent. If someone truly loves you, they'll remember it." I remembered, and I was learning to live with it. One Thursday afternoon, my mother called. I was driving Noah home from his art class. I didn't want to pick up, but I did, because I was ready. "Evelyn," she said, "your father and I want to come talk. It's important. Sunday afternoon, okay?" Her voice was polite, calm, as if nothing had ever happened. I agreed. Not because I had hope, but because I needed to close the fog still hanging inside me. This time, they arrived on time. No food, no belated condolences. Just a thick golden envelope and the solemn faces of people about to enter a contract negotiation. I didn't invite them into the kitchen. We sat in the living room. Roman was in the next room, pretending to read. Noah sat on the floor near my feet, coloring with the pencil set Robert had bought during their last trip to the bookstore. My father started. "Evelyn, the sadness has passed. But now we have to think about the future. Your mother and I talked it over. Robert's life insurance is substantial. It's part of the family's shared legacy, something we should all benefit from." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Remember in 2015 when we helped with your house down payment? Elena still has installments left on her new car. We're not asking for much. 40% for your mother and me, and 20% for Elena. Seems fair." My mother jumped in before I could respond. "Evelyn, this isn't a demand. It's about sharing. We're family. Robert called your dad Dad too, remember?" I wanted to laugh, but couldn't. This house was still soaked in grief. Yes, Robert had called him Dad, out of politeness, out of kindness. I spoke calmly, but the veins in my face had already begun to rise. Not because I was angry that Robert had called him that, but because now that Robert was gone, they were assigning a dollar value to his absence. Noah looked up, confused by the tone. He put his pencil down, opened his bag, and pulled out a folded piece of green-edged paper. I recognized it. A drawing he'd made the day before. I'd thought it was just a silly sketch. He walked over to his grandparents, speaking with calm clarity. "I have a receipt too. A love receipt." My parents froze. Noah placed the paper in my father's lap. My dad looked down. First line, receipt of love and support. Sender, Noah Thomas. Recipient, Grandma and Grandpa. "Did you visit me and Mom when Dad died?" "No. $0. "Did you stay with me when I had nightmares?" "No. $0. "Did you hug me and Mom?" "No. $0. "Did you ask me how much I miss Dad?" "No. $0. "Did you help clean, cook, or support the funeral?" "No. $0. "Did you cry for my dad?" "No. $0. "Total value?" $0. Noah looked at them with a gaze far beyond his years. "Dad said everyone shows love in their own way. But if you don't act, it's not real love." He took a breath. "I don't think you came here because you love Dad, or me and Mom. You came here because of money." No one spoke. Only the sound of oak leaves brushing the windows broke the silence. I held Noah's hand tightly. My father shifted in his seat, about to say something, but Roman stepped out and stood beside me. Every number can be discussed. But love, it can't be divided into percentages. My mother flushed red, trying to keep her voice composed. He's still a child. You shouldn't be teaching him to think badly of his grandparents. I stood up, eyes steady, voice firm but not loud. My son isn't thinking badly. He's telling the truth. If you still consider this a family, then I'm asking you to leave. And don't come back until you understand that family isn't a formula for interest calculations. My father stood, picked up the envelope, and left without a word. My mother followed, her heels clacking sharply on the wooden floor, like someone retreating from a stage no longer lit for them. They walked out of my house. Not once did they turn back. If anyone thought that would be the end of it, they were wrong. They didn't return. But messages came daily. Can you reconsider? Elena is really struggling. She feels excluded. We're blood, Evelyn. I didn't reply. I used to think I'd be an ungrateful daughter if I cut contact. But the cost of staying in a toxic relationship was far greater. It drained every day from Noah and me. I blocked their numbers. So they started emailing. Then they texted Roman. One day, my mother even showed up at my workplace with flowers, telling the receptionist, I'm her birth mother. She has to speak to me. I chose not to see her. I didn't need a conversation where someone came only to accuse me of cruelty for refusing to be exploited. Later, I met with Christian, Robert's friend and our family's estate attorney. We sat at a small cafe Robert used to love. I told him everything. He simply nodded, pulled out the file, and slid a copy of the will across to me. Everything is protected, Evelyn. No one but you and Noah has legal rights. They have no basis for claims. I held the document, not to look at the money, but to confirm that a man had loved me and our son enough to prepare even for the worst. I left the cafe lighter, not because the law was on my side, but because I no longer owed anyone an apology for protecting myself. That night, Noah and I made pizza at home. He laid slices of pepperoni carefully on the dough, then looked up and asked, Mom, do we need Grandma and Grandpa? I paused, looked at him. We need love. And if someone doesn't bring love, you don't need to feel guilty for not keeping them around. He nodded, then said, wiser than I expected. I think Dad would agree. 3 days later, I received a handwritten letter. It surprised me. The sender hadn't written to me in over 20 years. A pale blue envelope. Inside, my mother's handwriting, neat and rounded. Evelyn, I'm not apologizing to be forgiven. I just want you to know. I was wrong. I had no right to impose an obligation on love, and I didn't understand that until I saw Noah look at me like I was a stranger. Your father once said, our daughter is strong, but she shouldn't have to be strong alone. I don't expect you to come back. I only hope that one day my actions will be worthy of seeing the warmth in your eyes again. Your mother. I folded the letter, stared out the window, and thought. For the first time in my life, she had bowed her head through the handwriting, not through demands. We left the letter on the table. Noah said softly, Mom, if they really want to be good, maybe we can give them one chance. Just one. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him and saw Robert in his eyes. Not in appearance, but in that quiet, unconditional compassion. I smiled and touched his cheek. Yes, one chance. But this time, with conditions. We thought, after that letter, that my parents had truly begun to change. But once again, we were wrong. The very next morning, as I was cleaning up the backyard, still scattered with traces of the previous night's gathering, the phone rang. It was a call from my mother. I answered. After everything that's happened, she said, our family needs to sit down and talk. Your father and I are ready to come to your house. I nodded. Inside, I still held on to a hope that maybe they had reflected on themselves, that they would apologize, that they would say they finally understood how precious true love really is. They arrived with a briefcase. Inside were papers, spreadsheets, presented under the label, Secure Retirement Plan. My father began explaining like it was a corporate presentation, that he had contributed for years toward Elena's future, and now there was a shortfall of over $150,000 to ensure she had enough for business investments and a comfortable retirement. And that it would be perfectly fair if I helped with that amount, not necessarily half of Robert's life insurance. I sat in silence for a moment, until the fury rose in me and broke free. "You want me to use Robert's money to fund Elena's retirement?" I said, pointing at them. "You don't need to worry," my father replied. "Just $150,000. The rest is completely yours. You don't have to give anything to Elena." My mother added, her tone gentle. "You don't need that much money, Evelyn. Robert's gone, but you still have your family. We're just trying to reorganize, to make things more reasonable." I looked down at my hands. My fingernails were trembling. I didn't know if it was the cold or the rage swelling up to my throat. I didn't know what to say, but I knew I had to say something. "Get out!" I shouted. "You are no longer allowed in this house." Tears rolled down my face, but this time, not from grief. This time, it was because I finally knew. I didn't need a toxic relationship. Not anymore. My parents stood up and left. Not once did they look back. The first morning after cutting ties, I woke up without a phone call. No email from my mother, no message from my father. Just the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains and the steady rhythm of Noah's breathing beside me. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dream of Robert collapsing. I began to rebuild our daily life, not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed to live. For Noah, and for myself. I cut down on overtime, started taking more stable shifts. Robert's close friend, Dr. June from the ER, helped me switch schedules so I could be home with Noah in the evenings. No words were exchanged, just a lunchbox or a basket of fruit left on the front porch, with a handwritten note. "I've got this part today." Noah slowly got used to the fact that his father wasn't there anymore, but he never forgot. He folded his dad's shirts and placed them in a wooden box next to the miniature basketball hoop Robert had never finished. Every night I read to Noah, and we picked stories Robert used to love. One night, he turned to me and asked, "Mom, if I'm sad, will you be sad too?" I stroked his hair. "I'll be with you in sadness, but then we'll walk through it together. No one has to go through it alone." A month later, Robert's family organized a small memorial at the hospital. They invited me to speak. I stood in front of Robert's colleagues, the hospital director, and the residents he had mentored. I didn't read a speech. I simply told a story. About the man who taught his son to play basketball by watching YouTube, who left a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Saturdays belong to Noah," who once told me, "If I die before you, please teach Noah to love the right way. Don't teach him to be too strong. Teach him to be kind." The male doctors lowered their heads. Some of the nurses wiped their eyes, their tears quietly falling. Afterward, the hospital director announced the establishment of the Robert Thomas Scholarship Fund for underprivileged medical students from rural areas. Robert's family contributed most of the funding. I asked to contribute a small amount from the insurance. It wasn't much, but it mattered. It was the first time I saw Noah smile brightly since his father's funeral. "Dad gets a scholarship named after him? That means lots of people will know about him, right?" I nodded. "Dad's still saving lives, just in a different way now." Roman moved in with us for 3 months to help Noah adjust. Every morning, he walked Noah around the neighborhood. Every afternoon, he sat down with him, gently untangling the emotional math in his little heart. One April evening, I received a letter from an elderly woman named Annette, the mother of a patient Robert had once saved. "I didn't know Robert was your husband until I read the news. My son was stabbed in an attack. No one thought he'd survive. But Robert didn't give up. Now my son is a father. I want you to know, Robert didn't just save lives. He changed ours. I folded the letter and placed it beside our wedding photo. That was the moment I understood. I was not alone. Family isn't just where you're born, it's the people who do not turn away from you in your pain. I rearranged the house, cleared out the things my mother had left behind. No more scented candles or embroidered linens, but I kept one photo frame, a picture of Robert and Noah, beaming in their DIY basketball jerseys. Every day, I look at that photo, and I know I am healing, not because I'm stronger than anyone else, but because I no longer need anyone to prove I'm worthy of love. I just need to remember, Noah and I, we are enough. Nearly 6 months have passed since we said goodbye to Robert. In the first days after the funeral, I measured time only by what needed to be done. Taking Noah to school, cleaning the backyard, paying bills, responding to each condolence message. But then, one day, I realized I had stopped counting, not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had found its place inside me, like a small stone resting quietly at the bottom of a river, no longer causing ripples, but never dissolving either. I learned to love my new life without feeling like I was betraying the old one. I learned to truly listen to Noah, to understand that he didn't need me to be unconditionally strong. He just needed me to be there, truly. Every morning we water the plants together. I teach Noah to tell the different kinds of mint apart, the way Robert once taught me to recognize irregular heartbeats through a stethoscope. We light candles on Robert's birthdays, and in this small house, the name Robert is never a forbidden word. It is a reminder of love, of dignity, of how we choose to live, even when the ones closest to us choose to turn away. I no longer keep in contact with my parents, not because I haven't forgiven them, but because I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require the restoration of a relationship. Forgiveness is for my peace, but boundaries are for my survival. I once thought losing my husband meant losing everything, but it turns out I only lost the ones who were never truly here to stay, and that was a kind of freedom. Noah is growing up with gratitude, not bitterness. He understands that some things happen not because anyone is to blame, but because some people are simply incapable of reaching love. One evening, after we reread a handwritten letter from Robert, Noah turned to me and said, "Mom, I don't miss Dad because he's gone. I miss him because he was here." I broke down in tears, not from sadness, but because my child somehow had grasped something that took me months to reach. True love never disappears. It only changes form. Today, if you're listening to this story and find yourself betrayed by the very people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to know one thing: you are not alone. I once thought I had to trade my self-worth just to keep something called family, but now I know. Family is not measured by blood, but by action. The ones who stay through the storm, the ones who wipe your tears without expecting anything, the ones who ask, "Are you okay?" and truly listen. Those are your family. I choose to keep the ones who know how to love, and let go of the ones who only know how to demand. Not because I'm bitter, but because I've learned to love myself, the way Robert once loved me, the way I will teach Noah to love himself. And if you're somewhere out there, hearing me say this, I hope you find the strength to rise, not with rage, but with clarity. Because love should never be a negotiation. It is a gift, and you deserve to receive it, fully, completely, from those who will never make you prove that you are worthy of it.